Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Ruff, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. I know it's kind of weird to be doing back-to-back full-length episodes after yesterday's show with Tess Lewis, but here we are. This one is actually sort of a hybrid. While yesterday's was a pre-recorded show from early March before things went all to hell, this one's brand new, recorded yesterday, and it is sort of a COVID check-in, but it's also about a new book with a past guest, so I'm formatting it like a regular episode of the show. Not that this should matter to anybody but me, but I'm obsessive-compulsive and focused on taxonomy and all that stuff. Since it is a COVID check-in, I ought to give you an update on the home front. Amy and I are doing fine. No sign of COVID. Bendico remains the laziest greyhound in the world. I managed to get in a monster-sized run on Saturday morning on a new route through my neighborhood, which was good as far as I'm concerned. I've also lined up check-in podcasts for the rest of this week with past guests, so we should be back to shorter episodes through Friday, those 20 to 30-minute ones where people check in and let me know how they're doing in this crazy situation. In bad news, I discovered that both of the last two people I recorded with in person, Whitney Matheson and Sato Muhalyan, both of them came down with COVID. We recorded on March 7th in New York City, separate sessions on a trip that also included a multi-hour visit to the Antiquarian Book Fair in New York, where I had a long conversation with Henry Wessels, who has not come down with COVID-19. For a whole variety of reasons, I was going to say a host of reasons. I don't think I was an asymptomatic carrier who somehow infected both Whitney and Sato, but it's still freaky to think that both people I met with for extended conversations on that last trip into New York wound up infected within a week plus of our conversation. Anyway, that's out of the way. Let's get to the show. My guest this time around is Matt Ruff, who is the author of the fantastic new novel 88 Names, published by Harper. 88 Names is set about 20 years in the future. It's a world where virtual reality has progressed immensely, and people can spend their time in massive multiplayer online role-playing games, and there's a whole economy built around that. Because it's a Matt Ruff novel, there's also an amazingly propulsive plot to it. I would tell you more. Matt gives a great plot description during our conversation, so there's no point in my capitulating it here. All I'm going to say is 88 Names is a crazy addictive read. I enjoy the living heck out of it, and you should pick it up. Since Matt's book tour is canceled due to COVID, and the book itself is so much about virtual reality, Matt's doing some VR appearances to support 88 Names. He's also got a podcast about the show done with his partner, Blake Collier, co-host Blake Collier, and he's doing appearances on other podcasts besides mine, which is fine. I understand. But we do talk about the virtual reality appearances during the episode, what they're like, and, well, this whole new world that he's that we've been waiting for 30 years, 30 plus years if you go back to when we first read Neuromancer. Anyway, I want to highlight one that's coming up soon. If you're listening to this episode in close to real time, you can take part in Matt's live reading and Q&A on AltSpace VR on Friday, April 17th, 2020 at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There's info about that on Matt's website, by Matt Ruff. By is B-Y, not B-U-Y, as well as on altvr.com. There'll be links to that in the show notes for this episode, and I spell everything out at the end of our conversation. Now, as far as caveats go, it's a remote recording, and we talk during the episode itself about the problems with the lack of physical cues in virtual conversations and audio quality, blah, blah, blah. And here's Matt's bio. Matt Ruff is the author of the novels Fool on the Hill, Sewer, Gas, and Electric, the Public Works trilogy, Set This House in Order, A Romance of Souls, Bad Monkeys, The Mirage, and Lovecraft Country, which is being produced as an HBO series by Jordan Peele, Misha Green, and J.J. Abrams. Bad Monkeys is currently under development as a Universal Studios film with Margot Robbie attached to star. His most recent novel is 88 Names. And now, the 2020 Virtual Memories conversation with Matt Ruff. Before we get to 88 Names, how are you and your wife and family coping with pandemic, with self-iso, and everything else? You're in the Seattle area, which was hit hard early on, but I'm doing all the talking. Tell me how you're doing.
No, well, the thing is, like, Lisa and I both work at home normally, so that part of our lives really hasn't changed much. I mean, I was supposed to be on book tour right now, and so there's been some adjustment with that. But even there, because my new novel is about virtual reality, I had a lot more online promotion lined up than I otherwise might have. And I've been getting interesting invitations to do interviews in virtual reality, which we can talk about. So in a weird way, we've been less impacted, I think, than other people. It's when we go out that you suddenly realize, oh, yeah, we're living in an odd time where, it's of course, there's less traffic and what traffic there is at unusual times of day. And then because people are not letting their kids play on the street, as much anyway, it's quieter outside. That's the spooky part. And you just see a lot of dog walkers and everybody's doing that sort of avoidance dance where you see people coming a block away and you decide, okay, let me cross the street at this point so I don't have to go right past them. And so, yeah, we're doing fine. It's just part of me is, we're more worried about other people and how the landscape is going to change. And I have no idea how many of our favorite local businesses are going to make it through this. I'm worried about the bookstores because they've not been declared essential businesses here in Washington State. And, that there are plenty of them that would love to argue about that. But the point is that they can't do, even curbside pickup anymore. So hopefully that will be adjusted at some point in the next month or so. But it's more just not knowing how long this is going to continue and what the world is going to be like when it's over. And, not incidentally, how is it going to affect the election
sure.
this November?
Yeah. Does it match any dystopia that you had read in all of your science fiction, et cetera, background? Because to me, it looks more like the phony war in England before World War II begins than anything else, but that's really not the same exactly.
I think that it's funny that it's part of it is it's less melodramatic than I think a novel would be in a lot of ways. And also, I think one of the things that it's easy to lose sight of if you're not working in the medical field, if you're not in the hospitals actually seeing people die, or not in nursing homes where a lot of people are dying. It's basically just numbers on the screen unless you or someone you love gets sick, and so far we've been fortunate that no one we know personally has come down with this. So, although we do have some friends who work in hospitals, but that's the other thing, is that a story would take you into the heart of the pandemic and you would see what was happening. Whereas, again, if you're sheltering at home, you're really not getting that sense of exactly how bad it is on the front lines.
Although you could play with you could play with the creeping paranoia and concern that whoever you're living with may or may not be infected, or the delivery man, etc. But that's getting into the weird psychological horror aspects of it.
No, it's true. But yeah, the other thing though, that it's funny, it struck me that PBS, in a rather subversive move, they aired on streaming, they put up this, I think it was either an old Nova or an old Frontline about the 1918 pandemic. They made that available free a few weeks back, just when this was beginning. And Lisa and I, because we're perverse, we decided to watch that. And one of the things that struck me thinking about it is that they didn't have social media. So there, where you had towns that were quarantined, I mean, that would be a completely different experience again, even more removed than this. If you had, no news whatsoever, except maybe, I mean, did they even have radio in 1918?
No, I don't think there was even radio news or anything. Not much, certainly.
Yeah. So I just imagine living in a small town somewhere, and even the mailman you're viewed with suspicion, and you just got to wait for it to end, or for, somebody to come and tell you it's over. That must have been quite something. So as isolated as we feel now, and as deprived and depressed as people feel, I got to say, we're still much better off than I think people were 100 years ago, in terms of at least having some sense of what's going on.
And conceivably, you could still fit the future of 88 names into this world, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Reading it last week, I was thinking, there's nothing in here that makes the world implausible based on where we are now. But
I mean, it's funny. The one thing, of course, being that it does make occasional reference to real world personalities. Like, there is a definite reference to Kim Jong-un still being alive and still being in charge of North Korea, 20 years in the future. So if he dies of coronavirus next week or next month, then that part becomes fictional. But
he's going to be fine, because there are literally 0 cases in North Korea.
That is true. Yeah. And that is one advantage they have over us, is yes, nobody there is sick or even unhappy.
Yeah, as we know. And this is why I think the World War Z might be the most appropriate book for trying to get a grasp of this era, at least in terms of the international relations aspects of how countries relate to each other when this is the spreading fear that's going on around them. But tell me about 88 Names. Tell me about where the virtual reality aspect of it began for you, the shifting identity notion, which means one thing when you're a writer versus a quote unquote normal human being. Fill me in. Let's talk 88 Names.
So yeah, I am a game player from way back. When I was 12 years old, I worked as a playtester for a Manhattan-based war game company called SPI, Simulations Publications Incorporated. So I would go in on Friday afternoons and hang out and play prototype board games. And they specialized in war games with titles like NATO Division Commander and Austerlitz, but they also had science fiction fantasy titles, and those were the kinds of things I would typically gravitate towards. The first game I ever worked on, and the one I'm still fondest of from that time, was a game called The Creature That Ate Sheboygan, which is a simulation of Godzilla fighting the Wisconsin National Guard. And so yeah, that was sort of what I did as a kid for fun. And while I was at SPI, I also got my first taste of computer games, because this would have been the mid to late 70s, and they had an IBM mini computer, meaning a computer that was the size of a desk rather than the size of a whole room, that they would crunch survey data on. But it also came preloaded with a text-based Star Trek simulator and a colossal cave adventure. And so, after hours, I would mess around with that. And then they also had a couple of what were then called microcomputers, these Radio Shack machines that were the first desktop PCs, with, I think there was like a whopping 128 kilobytes of RAM.
Hey, now let's not talking crazy there. That's
yeah.
I remember those days. It was
yeah.
I forget it was going from 16 sectors to 32 was a big thing also with the floppy drives. But
no, that was the floppy, and the floppy drive was optional. Like the standard loading device was actually a tape recorder.
Oh God, I remember those too.
Cassette tape recorder. Yeah. And so, that was it was really, really low tech, but, and these were $800 machines, which was what was crazy, but, but that's, it's just the computing power has increased so much. So anyway, I got sucked into computer games early on too. And then, fortunately for my career as a novelist, I did not have enough money until really fairly recently to buy the cutting edge computer technology. So, this became particularly important when people took Dungeons and Dragons and put it on the internet and created the massive multiplayer online role playing game, which is things like World of Warcraft, where that can really be a lifestyle in itself, where you just spend all your time in world fighting monsters and collecting loot and stuff. And but when those games debuted, I did not have a fast enough internet connection to play them. Again, good thing for my writing career, but I read about them and I read blogs written by designers who'd worked on them, and I read other articles that people had written about them. And this is how I heard about this phenomenon called gold farming, which is a thing where people play, World of Warcraft or other early computer games and other early role-playing games and collect virtual loot, imaginary magic swords and other in-game property, and then sell them to other players for real money, which is fascinating on multiple levels. First of all, this whole trust issue, where this was early days, was before PayPal, so people would mail cashier's checks, sometimes for hundreds of dollars, to strangers in other parts of the country and basically trust them to then meet them in world and hand over the virtual goods. And that worked more often than not. But then it also, created these customer service problems where if somebody did get cheated, they would complain to the games company, and the games company would have to explain, well, we're sorry you didn't get your magic sword, but these people don't work for us and it's not our problem. And then there was this persistent issue, too, of players who don't have hundreds of dollars to spend on virtual goods felt that this was a form of cheating, that people were buying advancement in the game instead of working for it. So there's all these interesting levels about, not just this kind of cool job that people can have, but also the often very difficult attempt of game companies to control how people behave in these virtual worlds. So I decided I wanted to tell a story about a gold farmer or someone like a gold farmer. And tied into that was the idea that the story would take place entirely online, so that the characters would always be dealing not with each other as they actually appeared in real life, but with whatever
Avatars,
presentation they chose. Yeah, whatever presentation they chose for themselves online, and how would that affect things like personal relationships and trust and so, I thought about this for a long time and eventually came up with the idea that I turned my gold farmer into what I called a Sherpa, which is more of a full service kind of deal, where if you don't have hundreds of hours to build up your virtual palette, and what instead you can do, you can hire guys like my protagonist, John Chu, and pay them a fee, and they will cater an adventure for you, provide you with a ready-made, high-level in-game character with cool weapons and armor and a team of experienced players to come with you, and basically cater an adventure for you, a night out slaying dragons or whatever other game you want to play. And the idea would be that this would be, again, kind of a black market activity where it was a violation of the terms of service, a lot of these game companies. So there'd be in-game EULA police, enforcers of the end user license agreement, who would periodically break up these Sherpa raids and ban everyone's accounts. But again, that's just part of doing business in the black market. So John Chu and other Sherpas like him have multiple accounts, multiple names, and one gets canceled, they just start using another one. So that's the basic setup, is this guy trying to run this black market independent business on the internet, leading people through these games. And then he gets a new client, a guy who goes by the pseudonym of Mr. Jones, claims to be a wealthy, famous individual with powerful enemies, and because of that, he doesn't want to reveal his true identity, but he's offering $100,000 a week for a comprehensive tour of the world of online virtual reality gaming. And, it's one of those too good to be true type offers, but the money turns out to be real. So John Chu takes the job, but he's curious. And as the story goes on, he begins to suspect that Mr. Jones is actually Kim Jong-un slumming in cyberspace for some reason. So that's the basic setup. And then it's just, it's the first 2/3 of the novel take place in virtual reality where everyone has total control over how they look and sound. So you basically are constantly having to ask, how much do I really know about this person? And, you can, if they give you their name, you can look them up online and social media, but social media can lie too. So that's the setup. And then the final third of the novel, we do come out into real life and the masks come off and you find out what's really going on. But in the meantime, it's this cat and mouse game of who's who and what do they want.
Sure. Did you, writing the virtual scenes versus real world, finding a shift in terms of how you were writing? Or, was it essentially I have to ground things a little more. I can't be as fantastical as I am in these earlier scenes of the book. The whole thing is narratively propulsive. I mean, I zoomed through the thing. I know that's how you were writing it in terms of plot and engagement and all that stuff. I just wondered if you felt different between, covering those two aspects of reality.
Not really. I mean, I with the virtual scenes, I mean, first of all, I just tried to make it as matter of fact as possible. I tried to take advantage of the fact that he is, it's a first person narrative and that John Chu is a guide and his job is to explain what's going on in a way that is, easy to understand, but also hopefully feels organic rather than I'm going to stop now and spend, 20 minutes explaining how this little thing works. And when he does go into detail, it's driven by as much by his interest as a business person. He's like talking shop. So in that way, I hope to engage you and tell you what you need to know without, slowing the narrative to a crawl. And then just trying to make it as understandable as possible because I want the story to appeal as much to non-gamers as to gamers. I mean, the gamers are sort of, that's an easy sell, but even if you roll your eyes at the idea of playing something like World of Warcraft, I still want this to be a story that you can get into because it's really as much about the characters and the relationships as about the gee whiz sword fighting stuff.
Oh, dude, I don't play games.
Yeah.
And I was totally, because I have an incredibly compulsive personality and I would get totally addicted to this stuff. I avoid these things like the plague and found the book completely immersive and super engaging. So you succeeded. So congratulations.
No, I basically, yeah. And so from that is just try to make it feel as much like it's reality, but reality with extra powers because you can sort of seamlessly transition from one place to another. You can log off. You can do other stuff that you can't do in real life. But the point of the narrative is to make it feel as natural as possible. So yeah, there really wasn't as big of a difference as you might think. And then the other thing that I was trying very hard to do too is to make sure in the different gaming set pieces to make sure there was always more going on than just, this is the transcript of my best ever World of Warcraft quest. It's like, the gameplay is there, but I definitely also wanted to make it be as much about advancing the plot and getting to know the people and sharing their relationships as anything else.
Now, let me ask but the big notion behind the book or behind the VR experience of the book is what do we really know of identity? How do you know who you're talking to is who you're talking to? And you have a great way of doing, explaining encryption and certification that way. But in a greater level, the whole identity, sock puppetry, everything that goes into not just virtual reality, but the whole computerized world, that anonymity that allows us to be something we're not. How much does that overlap with your experience as a writer, and how much sock puppetry do you find that you've engaged in online over the years?
I mean, yeah, that's the
without giving away anything. Yeah.
I mean, I think to me, it's not so much in my own online experience. Impersonating other people is not something I've actually spent a whole lot of time doing, though I know there are people who definitely get into that. I think it's more, particularly when I first started messing around on the internet. Again, this was, early 2000s, late 1990s. There is a sense in which, sitting in your room in your underwear, and at the same time, it's like it's this weirdly intimate thing where you are in conversation with people, and there's a part of you that feels like you know them very well, and like you're there with them. And it leads to a lot of these weird online pathologies where people will jump into the middle of conversations other people are having, and act as if they're an invited member of the conversation. I think for me, it's more just being yourself, but it brings out different aspects of your personality. It makes you much more forward in some cases, much ruder in some cases. And as time has gone on, I've sort of learned to reassert, like, never mind how I'm reacting to this. Like, how is the person who's going to be reading this going to, how is this going to seem to them? Is it going to seem like I'm jumping out of nowhere, making this really sarcastic comment? Am I, making an off-the-cuff joke about something that somebody else is very serious about right now? And, sometimes you still crack jokes, but I just find that it takes a certain perspective to just sort of keep the way your utterances are going to appear to other people in mind when you do stuff, and just don't be an asshole, basically, without meaning to,
But that sense of empathy is something that the internet can kind of mitigate against, I guess, or at least it allows.
It can cut both ways, I think, and again, it probably helps. It's true that this does overlap into the writing experience to the extent that I obviously spend a lot of time on my own novels trying to imagine myself into other people's point of view, and that has been helpful over the years in sort of adjusting my own attitude online to not just saying whatever the hell comes to mind, but thinking about how it's going to be received, and what do I really mean to, what impact do I mean to have, which is why I will, particularly on Twitter, where it's just so very, very easy to just say the first thing that comes into your head. And I don't want to make other people's days harder than they need to be, especially now. So I often will not retweet the scandal of the day, because I just don't feel like anybody really needs that. I won't be cutting unnecessarily. I resist the temptation that I understand other people giving into of, yelling at the president when he tweets at them, because again, it's like, no, he doesn't care. He can't hear you. All you're doing is sending bad energy out into the void for somebody else to latch onto. So why even bother? But, but the internet definitely does. It just makes it very easy to act without thinking, and again, to ignore. It shouldn't be the case, but it makes it some ways easier to ignore the impact on other people, because it's so easy to do. But on the other hand, if you're willing to sit back and listen and pay attention, you can also learn a lot about the way people react to stuff and how they feel. So it can be an engine for understanding. It just takes a lot more patience to do that.
Yeah, do you see it as again, not necessarily good or bad, but revealing us for who we are as individuals, as opposed to all of mankind is like this because this is how assholes act on the internet?
Yeah, I think it's more situational than that. I mean, I think that it's not so much revealing humanity as it is. It reveals how humanity is in this particular situation with this particular technology. But I think it's just easy to make too many sweeping conclusions about it. If you can encourage people to act without thinking, you can encourage people. I think there are ways it's a good tool for manipulation, I guess is one way to put it. And like all tools of manipulation, you can sort of learn how to not be manipulated, but it takes effort and time and thoughtfulness. And if you mentioned having an obsessive personality. I have one too. And this is, of course, a problem with, again, I'm very much into Twitter, and the thing I'm constantly seeing is people bemoaning how bad Twitter is for them, even as it's clear that they're never, ever going to log off voluntarily. So, Yeah, it's a kind of an addictive behavior, and I totally get it, but yeah, it's quite fascinating that way.
Yeah, and I think the book explores it in some interesting ways, without being explicit or pedantic about it. I mean, it shows us what positives and negatives come out of the anonymity, the ability to be something different than your real world self, as it were. So what's interesting to me, it only occurred to me a few minutes before we started. Until the era of social distancing cut it off, I'm in this running club with a couple of guys who are about 20 years older than me and a few other people. And it's weird because there's nothing but identity. And they don't give a crap about what I do for a living or the podcast or anything else. They talk about their kids and stuff. I don't have kids. We talk about the Yankees a little bit, and it's just running. And all it is the act itself boiled down to this activity. It's like the exact opposite of virtual reality, except I don't have any substance under that except for my ability to finish on that last hill really well. So it was an interesting thing to me to contrast that with, the way we kind of shape our outlooks and shape our personae like this. So
you're saying with the running club, it's just about running? It's just about.
I mean, they'll talk about their personal lives, but I don't have one. And so that makes it a little challenging in that respect. Because saying that, oh yeah, I was having this interesting conversation with an author in Seattle about blah, 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 that's just going to
and their eyes glaze over. Yeah. Well, that is the interesting thing too about the internet. It can connect you with people who have one shared interest. And this is another thing that particularly in the early days, I think kind of astonished a lot of people, is just the realization that people can have one thing in common with you and nothing else. And to some people, that's very disturbing to find out, well, wait a minute, you love this same author I do. What do you mean you voted for Donald Trump? Or what do you mean
everything else is, yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, there's definitely, it just punctures a lot of illusions. Again, if you're willing to let them be punctured. I think a lot of people, I talk about this in the novel, the idea that one of the things the internet has done, it's put culture shock on tap 24/7. And a lot of people just don't know how to deal with that. And again, I feel fortunate in that, partly because of how I was raised and partly because of what I do for a living, I'm a little more, at least when I have time to think about it, I'm a little better at being constantly reminded that I share the planet with billions of people who I'm never going to see eye to eye with. So yeah, it's interesting that way. And that is definitely something else that factored into the novel.
Sure. Now, when you talk about having a virtual book tour versus a real one, how is it going so far? And are there aspects of the technology that you couldn't have done even with like the previous book, the way things have advanced?
I think that it's well, this is the interesting thing, is that the physical book tour is, when I first started out in the business, I actually traveled quite a long distance on book tour. As time has gone on with each novel, the book tours, it seems, have gotten smaller and smaller. In the past couple novels, I basically haven't made it beyond the Pacific Northwest and California. And the reason being that it doesn't make sense to fly a mid-level author like me to New York, because the whole point of book tour used to be that it would generate news stories and hopefully get local interest. And in a market like Manhattan, there's just no way, unless you're Neil Stephenson or some other really big author, to generate enough local media to make it worth the cost of flying somebody cross country. And so book tours were probably always a relatively inefficient way to publicize novels, and now they've become even more so. And the internet has a lot more reach. So I think, on the one hand, it's been very helpful, and because all of these new technologies are coming online, like Zoom, there's a group called Creative Mornings that has meetings all over, these sort of group breakfasts, monthly breakfasts in various cities around the world. And I was supposed to be their featured speaker last month, but of course we couldn't all meet up in one space because we'd have killed somebody. But But then we were able to still do it using Zoom technologies. That was kind of cool. Just that teleconferencing, which is a variation. I'd done things kind of like that before, but never with that many people and that many faces on the computer screen at the same time. But I think the thing that has really kind of blown my mind is the VR stuff. I did a virtual reality interview on Sansar, which is the VR version of Second Life, on something called the Drax Files Radio Hour, which is run by Bernard Drax. He lives in Munich, but really he lives in Sansar, and so we dialed in and met. And I treated myself to an Oculus VR headset as a reward for finishing the novel, so I was able to actually put the goggles on and hold the hand controllers and experience in first person in the body of a Bad Monkeys inspired avatar. So I'm like this bipedal mandrill sort of standing there, and there's a table with virtual mock-ups of my books in between us, and and they were able to make virtual t-shirts that mention games that exist only in 88 Names, the novel. So it was just this very cool experience of sort of living a version of what I had written about. And, the technology is not nearly as seamless yet, but it's farther along than you might think. And I just found that incredibly cool, and thinking about how even if it were, even if we were not in the middle of a pandemic right now, that would be really convenient to be able to get people together from all over the world very quickly. And, not just have a virtual meeting, but have a virtual meeting if you were doing a book club, you could literally have it taking place in a scene from the book you were reading, and you could come as the ultimate cosplay version of whatever character you wanted. So that was the neatest thing I've done so far. And then the slightly lower tech version, we had a book club in Second Life, just the regular Flatland version where you're looking on screen but not wearing the goggles, and that was more accessible because more people were able to tune into it directly and show up there.
Sure.
So this stuff is all kind of cool, and I think it probably has a lot more reach than the traditional book clubs do. It does lack some of the personal cues, particularly the non-VR stuff, where one of the things we noticed during the book club, it was me, Ken Liu, S.L. Huang, and C.B. Lee, and we didn't get as much crosstalk, 4 people on a panel, and there was less crosstalk that you would normally have in a real encounter, because you cannot see people's actual facial expressions, so it's a lot harder to signal, I want to jump in with a point here. And
dude, you know what I'm going through right now. This whole thing is withdrawal for me, not being able to actually sit across a table from someone.
Exactly. So that is something you do miss. And the other aspect of being on a regular book tour, of course, is getting to meet booksellers who, particularly for someone who writes the kind of books I do, that's always been really important. The independent booksellers who get me and can sort of hand sell to the kind of people who are interested in whatever the hell it is I'm writing about this time. And so I definitely miss that. And that's an experience that you cannot simulate nearly as easily with online technology. So that's never going to go away, but I think that this is probably a more efficient way to broadcast. And of course, by its nature, it also creates a recording of whatever you do, so that VR interview I did is going to exist forever now on YouTube. So, yeah.
Now, did you have I've never tried Oculus or any of the other systems, the nausea thing, or are you
Yes, I was
to that?
I was actually kind of disappointed in myself and in the technology to discover this, because I've played flight simulators and other, games for years on a regular PC and never had a problem with motion sickness. And so I assumed, well, if, I've read that some people have this problem, but I certainly won't. But yeah,
I wrote a novel, for God's sake. Yeah. It
turns out having the thing strapped to your face instead of 3 feet in front of you makes a huge difference. If my body is standing still and my eyes tell me I'm moving really quickly, I start to get queasy. And it's unfortunate because it has ruled out, I think, a bunch of the more interesting activities that you can do in VR, like flying, like,
sure,
even various kinds of running. And then the other problem is that the office where I do the VR is a long but narrow space. So I have to be very careful, particularly with flailing my arms when I'm in VR, because the Oculus actually has this very cool system called the Guardian system that lets you basically spray paint a line around yourself that will, this is where I can
virtual perimeter.
It sets up a virtual perimeter, and then if you get too close to it, this mesh framework appears to warn you're getting close to the quote unquote wall, and then it turns red if you get really close to it, and then if you go through it, it switches your goggles over to this sort of grainy black and white, so you can actually see what's going on, and that's actually very good to keep you from walking into a wall. But the problem is that your hands move so fast. If you are punching, you will blow right through the Guardian space and slam into a bookshelf or a wall before you even realize it. So not only, can I not do flight simulators, but I have to be really careful with like swashbuckling.
Yeah.
So no wild lightsaber duels for me, Yeah, exactly. So that's been kind of disappointing that it's temporarily at least limited what I can do. And like eventually, of course, there's another version of the Oculus that I did not buy that is untethered, that you can basically, it runs through your smartphone, so you can just go to any space, like my garage, which is much bigger and has much more room, if I wanted to do that. But even there, you do run into the problem of, if your body movement does not match what your eyes are telling you and you're prone to nausea, that can be an issue. So so that's kind of disappointing. And I don't know. I've been doing this podcast with a friend of mine where we talked to various VR tech people about, are they going to be able to solve this? And they're working on it, but they don't know whether the motion sickness is a solvable problem, apparently. So
bug versus feature. Yeah. I get you. Now, how much is this thanks, match up with, and you're just a little bit older than me, I think a couple of years, our William Gibson experience in the 80s with Neuromancer, and Jaron Lanier, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, into the 90s with like what VR was supposed to be when we were all Mondo 2000 and such.
What's weird is how Gibson was simultaneously ahead of his time, but it's still like his technology was in some ways much smoother than what we've got now and much more seamless, and that was the way he wrote it. But at the same time, it's like the resolution is a lot different. Like the real world cyberspace, I think, is in some ways a lot more interesting and a lot more varied than the sort of arcade version that he created for Neuromancer. And that particularly in the early novels, like cyberspace was mostly geometric shapes against a fairly, uninteresting background. And then they got into the next generation where they were accessing people's sensorium and tricking them into imagining fully realized virtual spaces. But the reality is both more advanced and less advanced than that, where the computer graphics, it's not photorealistic yet, and the processing power needed to pull that off may be still a little ways down the road. But there's a lot more going on than just simple geometric shapes hanging in a grid. So it's, and then of course that's not even counting I think the real virtual reality, which is not the stuff with the goggles so much as social media and the internet, which is where everybody sort of spends their time online and just sort of imagines. It's not, it sort of takes over your sensorium in a different way, I guess you'd say.
Sure.
So, so it's kind of an interesting time to be alive. I'm at that point now when I'm old enough to know, I really am going to die someday, and probably not that far along, but I hope I get to hang out as long as possible to see where this stuff goes.
Yeah. Do you find in that respect in the novel you go into, I think it's the part with the virtual fishing where the dopamine hit is sort of the ongoing stimulus for people to keep playing this particular part of the game and keep leveling up. That is the key driver for pretty much all social media and interaction like this. I know we talked about the way people, look for things to be outraged about, et cetera, but that sense of needing.
It's funny. I think if you did a more comprehensive survey, you would find a variety of drivers. I mean, certainly Part of the problem, of course, it's the nature of Twitter and the algorithm to put you together with like-minded people, or people who have complementary pathologies, maybe not the same as you, but people who, if you like being outraged, then congratulations. We will find you someone to outrage and be outraged in turn by. But it's just like it's funny when going back to like World of Warcraft, that for me, it's very much about the loot gathering aspect. Like you, I am, again, very obsessive. So I'm happy to play that. It's a multiplayer game, but I play it mostly solitaire. I just like going around and collecting stuff and leveling up characters and, getting that constant feedback of, oh, made another level. Now I get to choose a new talent, or, oh, yes, let me go into this dungeon and get some more loot and buy another, thing. Other people are really into the role-playing aspect. Other people are really into the group phenomenon, like they like just hanging out with their friends and being social. Other people are much more, again, into the competitive PvP aspect, where it's much more competition rather than you versus the game. And I think that's probably true of the online experience in general, that you probably have different personality types wanting different things from it. And I imagine there are people who are immune to the outrage engine. It's just that we don't talk about them because the Twitter algorithm doesn't recommend them to us.
And they have nice, happy, peaceful lives too.
Right, exactly. So I'm sure there are healthy ways to engage. It's just that, again, that's part of the problem, is that the people who are in charge of social media, people who write about this stuff, may all belong to a more limited set of tribes than the full breadth of humanity. And that's another issue to come up with, to talk about.
That's certainly extrapolating any aspect of human behavior from what you see on Twitter. We would have President Sanders by now and various other things that seem hyper represented in that particular sphere, but aren't reflected in the broader world.
That was a great example where like a week before that, the Super Tuesday, everybody was convinced, everybody in my Twitter feed seemed to be convinced that Sanders was a shoo, and people who were happy about that and people who hated the idea. And you had, people writing articles about how important it was to stop him before he destroyed the DNC and threw the election to Trump. And then a week later, Biden cleans up on Super Tuesday, and all of that just sort of evaporates like it never happened. And
because a lot of voters aren't on Twitter. Yeah.
But just the way the narrative immediately reshaped itself in the wake of that. It's not just that, yes, the voters weren't on Twitter, but then the people on Twitter seemed to like suddenly forget the certainty that they had a few hours before, that of course Bernie's going to take it. So that's what's really wild, is the way, it's a group think, but also able to reorganize itself and then sort of forget, or at least not think too hard about what the common wisdom was 10 minutes ago.
Right. Rewriting reality like that. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. That could be a plot for another book for you, but
I'm sure this is something I'm sure I will have more to say about in different ways. Yeah.
I figure. How's the response been to 88 Names so far? I know it's only been out a few weeks, and I know the whole media thing is a little warped right now for obvious reasons, but that's
the weirdest thing about this. And again, because I haven't been able to go out and sort of deal directly with people, I've gotten much less feedback than I would have by this point. But the reviews I've read so far, there haven't been many, but they do seem to get what I was trying to do, and they seem to have enjoyed it. So the Paul DiFilippo love letter in the Washington Post has been my favorite so far. But I think of the handful of reviews there have been, I think have all been pretty positive. And so it seems to be working the way I'd hoped it would. And particularly the part about, yes, even if you're not a gamer, this is still a story you should enjoy. So I'm pleased with that. But again, I'm not even sure how many people are able to get the book. If you want the ebook or the audiobook, obviously that's readily available. But, Amazon deciding that they too felt that books were an inessential service. And so there was this point where it was like a month-long wait for novels because they were busy delivering other things.
It was funny. I pre-ordered the book from Amazon just because I wanted to get it right away in case we were going to record in that first week. And they apologized for getting it to me one day late. And I was like, it's okay.
Days.
It was March 18th instead of 17th. I'm like, dude, it's all right. You're delivering some much more important stuff right now than this novel. And no offense, but getting that to me is less important than getting people's medical gear and stuff like that. You could have said, Gil, it's going to be a week. Can you deal with that? And I would have said, it's all right. One day late, and that's enough for them to apologize for. Jeez.
Yeah, but fortunately there are other options, like the new bookshop.org, which is the independent bookseller. It's sort of taking over for IndieBound, I think. They are and they give a portion of their profits to independent booksellers to sort of help them through this current situation.
Yeah. I ordered from them when I first heard about them a few months ago. I went out of my way to get something off of my Amazon wish list over to bookshop.org so it would help indie stores. So I'm glad that's out there, and I'm
And I mean, they're because that's their whole line. I think they're shipping in a more timely fashion, at least while we still got a post office.
Yeah. When we get to that bigger issue we're going to deal with. Let me ask a weird question. When it comes down to gaming, were you an arcade addict in your sordid 80s?
I certainly spent some time playing arcade games, and I look back fondly on that, but yeah, I was never a super rich kid. So I was never a super great player. So when you got to pay $0.25 to play, and then you've got to be good to get a long time out of it, as soon as possible, I wanted to convert to being able to play those games at home. And it's funny. I remember in one of my first moments of, true deferred gratification, my parents were willing to buy me an Atari. And then I realized, I think I don't want to get the Atari. I think I want to wait until I can afford an actual programmable computer. And so I ended up buying a TRS-80 a little bit later and messing around with that. And that was great because even though the graphics were really nothing to speak of, that was literally, they had like an ASCII character set, and that was with special symbols. That was what you had for graphics. There was no, but that you just, because it was programmable, it was like a toy you could do anything and could spend endless hours on doing different stuff and making your own things with. And that was better than an arcade toy where you were limited by whatever cartridges you could purchase. Yeah. And then it's funny. After I went to college, I did not go to arcades again for a long time. And I think I went when we first moved to Seattle. I guess I was in my mid-30s then. I went to one of those big GameStop, or not GameStop, but some other game something arcade in downtown, and it had gotten so much more expensive. Now instead of a quarter game, it's like 50 cents a dollar, and just not as much fun as when I was a kid. So I was always more of a computer game kind of guy. I liked just sitting at home messing around on my own. So. Again, which is weird even with a massive multiplayer thing, there's a sense in which I like to do my own thing and only interact with other people selectively. But
again, like you said, I think the games reflect who we are as individuals. Mm-hmm. In certain cases, that captures it pretty well, I think, because I'd be doing largely the same thing. I would be shunning human contact and just trying to understand the game as best I could. So,
and the problem is you've got 11 character classes. So if you want a max level character in each one, which is an obsessive person, of course you would, that's a real commitment.
and that's why I moved into running instead of gaming. And I actually started it at ReaderCon a couple of years ago, is where I first had the, let me just go down to the hotel fitness center, because what are the chances anybody from ReaderCon would be there? And I'll try and, get in some exercise. And that led to this weird almost 2 years of strange fitness as I approach 50. But at least there's a number to measure against. Like you say, you still have the leveling up aspect of it, I guess.
Yeah. I do the same thing. I've got a Fitbit, and they've got the badges based on the number of total miles you've walked in the lifetime of owning one. So, I think I got the length of Africa. I got the Serengeti Award for so that's, and I don't know what the next one is. And then they've got also for, if you go up steps, you've passed the top of the Empire State Building, you're getting close to the International Space Station, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it's again, I'm very susceptible to that kind of little micro encouragement thing. And it can work for you or against you, depending on what it is.
Yeah, it's a degree of we're always gaming or putting metrics on all these things, but it's there's a degree where if we can try and make it work for us and get some improvement, I guess that's a good thing. But anyway, bookstore you are dying to visit once quarantine is lifted.
Oh gosh, all of them. I mean, I think the main one I want to go, I want to go back down to Portland and go to PALS again. So I hope they're really still there. I mean, that was one of the big disappointments, was not being able to go down there. And fortunately I'd been fairly recently and grabbed some books, but I was really looking forward to going down there on book tour and just getting lost in the city of books and taking too much stuff with me. But so that'll be a joy. And then just going around my local bookstores, the Secret Garden books on Market Street and Queen Anne bookstore and Elliott Bay, just not being able to see those guys even, in passing is just sad. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that sort of thing. I've done those daily podcasts with past guests, just asking what would be that sign of normalcy, or just that we're past something. And it's usually things like that. Just the guy at the bookstore, the guy at the comic store, just being able to have this interaction again. So till then, we're stuck with Zencastr. So we'll, I'll work through this as best I can. Now you have a VR live reading at the end of this week. I
yes.
think. Similar to what you were talking about with the Oculus one earlier.
Yeah. No, this is going to be, it's on Altspace VR. Actually, let me just bring up my website so that I've got the actual data.
Yeah, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, of course.
Yeah. So it's Altspace VR. It's going to be 5:30 p.m. Pacific time on April 17th. That's this Friday. And you don't need a VR headset. You can just download the software from the Altspace VR homepage. And there's links on if you go to the appearances page on my website, you can find the link to download the software and then RSVP for the event. The main thing is if you do want to attend in person, you need to go through a tutorial when you first sign up for Altspace VR. It'll take a couple minutes. You don't want to do this right before the show starts. You want to do it a little bit in advance. But then, you'll be able to create an avatar and come into the virtual auditorium, and I'll be up on stage in my virtual avatar, and I'll do a reading and do some Q&A afterwards. And I think, then we'll drop the audience barrier, and I'll be sort of wandering among the crowd afterwards. So that'll be kind of an interesting thing too. So this is another venue that I have not. I've been there just to look around, but I have not done an event in yet. So it'll be interesting to see how it stacks up with the other VR venues I've been in. So that'll be neat.
I'll give it a shot. I've never tried one of these before. So yeah.
And God knows how many more months we're going to be doing this stuff. But
yeah, that's been the biggest thing. Just the open-endedness or closed-endedness of it, I guess, that sense that we just don't have any clear picture of when it'll be okay to go out again, I suppose. But at least I got 2,500 books here, and I've got a couple of years to go back to, certainly. So
yeah,
ebooks, whatever. But yeah.
So yes, now's your chance to work through that to be read pile that you've been waiting on.
And unlike Burgess Meredith, I'm nearsighted, so I don't have to worry about dropping and smashing my glasses. So I'll be okay.
That's also true in my case. And actually, I find as I get older, I read better without my glasses anyway. So.
Oh, I'm the same thing. I do most of my reading first thing in the morning or before I put in my contacts. I'm like, let me just do everything before I'm actually, able to see the rest of the world. But, any big reading projects while we're trapped here, or has it really been more about working on promoting the book?
Right now, it's more about, again, trying to find ways to just let people know the book exists. And this is another way in which the, sort of internet sort of reveals to you how limited your perspective is. It's like periodically, I'll do one more event, and then out of the blue, I'll see somebody mentioning on Twitter, like, oh my God, Matt Ruff has a new book out? I didn't know that. And of course, there's no reason anyone who isn't me should necessarily know that. But the fact that I've been, eating, drinking, breathing this book for months now, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. The majority of the human race has no idea that I exist, let alone this novel. But so yeah, I'm still trying to figure out different interesting ways to talk about it and to interact with people online. And yeah, I'm doing some reading at home, but it's just really hard to focus on a lot of stuff. So I'm just trying to get one concrete thing done per day. And yeah, and then at some point, I will feel I have done my best by this book, and then it'll be time to sort of actually start working on something new. So, and probably sooner rather than later. So,
because we'll help out any way we can. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, but it'll just be nice to, once we are all free to come outside again, to have at least some idea where I'm going next.
I think this project, or this book in particular, works for this moment really, really well. At least, from my, and I talked about it in a few past episodes here. It took me a month to finish the last book I was in, because it hit just in that same moment where there's this complete lack of focus. And after I was done, I picked up yours, and 2 days later I was finished, and I thought, oh, that's what I needed all this time. I needed a book that's incredibly thoughtful, well-written, and just zooming with this plot starting from page 1. And you really carried and propelled me that way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that's nice to hear. And yeah, if nothing else, I did try to make something. I mean, I'm hoping that its one downside as a pandemic reading book is that it goes by way too quickly.
I know. I was thinking that as I was saying it. I'm like, that's actually speaking against it. We want things that are going to take people 3 months to read, but yeah.
No, I mean, I get it though. It's like, you can't have both. And I'm happy to make people happy for a brief span of time and not outstay my welcome. That's a good way to do it. And then, you can always, go back to Infinite Jest afterwards
Yeah. Oh, I think I will. This will be something I think I'll be referring back to, especially as I tell other people about it too. So anyway, Matt, thanks for coming on, and, I'll help push the book where I can. And I promise not to Zoom bomb your reading on Friday. And,
no, you can try. It'll be interesting actually to see if the moderation controls work.
Yeah. And that's part of what I'm just so concerned with all of these things, that sense of oh God, am I going to be in the middle of something where somebody shows up and starts, ranting and raving, and then you realize that's a chunk of the world. So I guess it's okay. But,
better they do it online than out in the real world. So
True. So in the meantime, stay safe, stay sane. And we'll, I hope, get to meet up in real life sometime.
I hope so too. And same to you, man. Take care of yourself.
And that was Matt Ruff. Go read 88 Names. Even if you're not into gaming, and I'm not, this novel is just electric. It's fantastic read. It will propel you along. Like Matt said, the only downside of it is you'll probably go through it in one sitting, and it won't take up too much of the time that you're spending in quarantine or self-iso. But it's a really great novel. You can visit Matt's site, bymattruff.com, to find all sorts of links for ordering it. That's bymattruff.com. And that's also got links to his appearances, the podcast that he's launched around 88 Names, other appearances that he's making on other people's shows, and more. Matt's also on Twitter as bymattruff, spelled the same way, all one word, and I have to assume he's on Facebook too. And if you're listening to this episode in the first few days after it comes out, you should try to check out Matt's live reading and Q&A on AltSpace VR on Friday, April 17th, 2020, at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. You can find more info about that on the appearances page of Matt's site, as well as at altvr.com, and you'll need to download their app and do setup there, like Matt said. And that's altvr.com. Now, I recorded this episode from home via Zencastr, so not a travel, toll, parking, subway, or any other expense like that. Zencastr costs $20 a month, but I am not asking for Patreon support during these troubled times. If you have money to spare, don't put it in my Patreon unless you really want access to my Fear of a Square Planet bonus podcasts, in which case, hit me up and we'll work something out. Go give money to other people's Patreons. Support their GoFundMes, Kickstarters, Indiegogos, tip jars, whatever. Donate to charities. Maybe kick into your local food bank. Whatever you can do. There are a lot of people and a lot of institutions that are in need. I'm doing okay, so help where you can. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.